Hello everybody and welcome back to Kota Nerang. It's been a long time since my last video and even longer since the last one from the city. But don't worry, I've been cooking something. In this episode we will be focusing on the space behind the Petronas Towers, which I've built in the last one. If you haven't seen that, you should go check it out. Basically, it's gonna be a large park inspired by the one that is behind the Petronas Towers in real life. Because even though I'm not recreating Kuala Lumpur one-to-one, I want to get the same vibe. So especially in the center, I will take heavy inspiration, if not recreate some smaller parts outright. And with that said, we can get into the rough planning of the park, starting with its shape and size, which will be partially dictated by one of the buildings next to it, the convention center. And here it is, a simplified version of the KL Convention Center. That's what took me so long. Basically, I've been buried in the editor for over a month building this thing. So let's take a closer look at it. So now we are in the editor. Here you can see the asset in all of its glory. It's not a custom mesh since I started working on this before the official custom mesh support was even announced. But I would say that even despite it being just assembled from vanilla and region peg meshes, it looks pretty good. And yeah, it was also my first ever asset. That's why it took me so long. But now, let's take a look at how exactly it's built. Basically, since the facade and the roof are quite repetitive, I've built a couple different modules, which I then put together into the final form. Also, it is kind of a tree structure. For example, this wall piece is a sub-object of the main asset, but it itself is consisting of multiple sub-objects. This is how you keep the number of meshes you need to individually position quite manageable even for such a big asset. Additionally, there is a limit of 256 meshes per asset, so it wouldn't even be possible otherwise. The only downside of using sub-objects is that they disappear when in collision with a network. Even anarchy doesn't help, and sometimes I feel like it disappears if you just look at it wrong. You'll see plenty of that later. Back in the game, we can continue with the planning phase. I chose like a bean shape for the park with a large artificial lake towards the thicker part of the bean. First, I'm tracing the shape of the lake with wide pedestrian paths, because then I'm gonna use quite an interesting technique to get it exactly how I want it. I want to use real water and not just a surface, because that creates more depth, looks way better, and allows me to change the bottom texture. I also want the edges to be nice and sharp with no railing, so I can't use retaining walls. To achieve the effect I want, I put a second layer of paths inside the lake at the desired height and used Move It to overlay them. To then get a nice texture on the wall, I upgraded the upper paths with a retaining wall, which didn't spawn any terrain thanks to the bottom path. It would seem logical to use keys for this. However, when I was building this, I forgot about their existence. And later, I even discovered that it couldn't be done with them, because they have minimum height that is too tall. Now it's just about time to add the water, and for this, I upgraded the city to the new water simulation. In some places, the water didn't go all the way to the edge, but it was easily fixed by just tweaking the bottom path. With that defining feature finished, we can move over to sketching out the path layout. This is what I'm doing here is just a rough plan. It is all subject to change, and by that, I mean that some parts will change quite a bit. Now I'll trace all the paths with curb net lanes and remove them afterwards, because they are just placeholders. I don't want any real paths in the finished product, because they might do weird stuff with the terrain and most importantly, they would probably interfere with the convention center, causing it to disappear. So I'll use invisible ones instead. The next important part of the park is here, cause here I want to have a bridge over this narrow bit of the lake. To make the bridge fit better into the landscape, I'm raising the terrain on both sides a bit, and once I'm at it, I'll do all the terrain work necessary for the rest of the park. It sure would be easier to work on flat ground, but making a small hill here and there makes the park way more interesting. And I would strongly encourage you to not be afraid of elevation changes in your cities. To make the terrain subtle and smooth, I'm using low strength brushes, usually around 20%. Also, to make my life a bit easier, I make hills only in between paths. No paths except the bridge one go over some serious terrain. This is obviously for wheelchair accessibility, and not because it's easier to work with. Here comes one of the first major layout changes compared to the initial sketch. In some of the previous shots, you could have noticed that the space in front of the convention center is really large and its sides are not parallel to the walls of the convention center. I don't like that. That's why, here, I am properly measuring the distance from the wall with these measuring decals, and then making the paved area much skinnier. And because this connection is kind of weird and skinny, considering the importance of this area, I'm making it wider with a circular island of greenery in the middle. At this point, I had thought I had a finished layout. Spoiler alert, I hadn't. It would change, but it was enough to start doing the surfaces. It's going to be quite simple. I'll use this checker pattern for the space in front of the convention center, and the red brick surface for the path with grey decals in between on some of the intersections. After all, it rains a lot in Malaysia where the city is located, so some rainwater management would definitely be present. And the surfaces are finished, with only one minor deficiency. The surface also stuck to the bridge and there is no way to get rid of it, at least not one that I know of. With the paths done, it's time to fill in the park with some decorations and foliage. I don't want it to be just a grassy space with a couple trees, so I'm gonna be building some raised terraces and other interesting features, or play a bit with the trees and bushes to create more aesthetic composition. One of the methods I use to do that is bundling these palms into these, well, bundles, and slightly rotating each and every one of them, point ever so slightly away from the center. This I copied from the real life park, as they also have these dense clusters of tall palm trees there. After I've barely started with the foliage, I realized that there is too much empty space in between the paved area flanking the convention center and the paths on the mount around the lake. So I've added a new path in there, making it intentionally straight unlike any other one, to get even more parts of the real life park here and to bring out the park features more and connect it better to the convention center building. I also changed the surface of all the wider paths to the checker pattern. It was just too much of the red. Using the same path trick as for the lake, I made a sitting area off of the path. The main purpose of it is to bring out the topography by making use of it. If you don't put in any stuff like this into the park, it's gonna feel flat, even when there are hills. The game just isn't very good at showing elevation change. Overall, using the topography to your advantage is one of the most effective ways of making your city look super realistic. And as you can tell from the rest of my builds, I'm not really good at it. So this park is my first attempt at learning how to work with elevation change, using different retaining walls and stuff. So from now on, I will try to bring elevation changes into all other areas of the city, to also make them look as realistic as possible. I wanted to somehow cover this path. My first idea was grass decals, but the problem is that they use the vanilla grass texture, and I don't. I use map texture replacer, specifically the home of the chameleon team, so the decals didn't match. The only other option was to cover it with an excessive amount of bushes, and even though I initially thought it was gonna be too much, it actually ended up making a nice backdrop to the area. But now, let's get into the time-lapse and finish the rest of the foliage in the front part of the park. Timelapse over, but before I show you the result, I want to build one more thing. As the unofficial theme of this episode already is learning to work with topography, I want to make another interesting elevation change based thing, just as I did on the other side of the wide red path. This time, it's however not gonna be just a little chill area, but an amphitheater. Amphitheaters are great because they obviously work with the terrain, thus serve as a visual interest, but also can function as valuable public spaces, as they can serve as grounds for many local events. And even when there is nothing happening, amphitheaters just naturally attract people, who can use them as a regular sitting space. I am again using the path trick to make nice and sharp terraces with a nice wall texture. To decorate it, I just added some foliage, mainly to the ends of the paths to cover them, and some nice surfaces that make it stand out as a unique place. And this is the result. I think it fits here quite well, and most importantly, makes the area ever so slightly more interesting. But now that the amphitheater is finished, let's do a couple cinematics of the finished half of the park before jumping into the second part of the video, just as I promised at the end of the time-lapse. In the second part of the video, I'll focus on the area in front of the convention center to take a break from the park. I won't be doing much here besides decorating the entrance and cargo delivery areas of the convention center. As for 2 out of the 3 lots in front of it, I need some specific assets that I'll probably need to make myself. As always, I'm starting by the road layout. There are not many new roads here, since I'll be working only in the immediate surroundings of the convention center. But I've tweaked basically every single road I've built in the last episode, to add bike lanes and make the geometry nicer. After laying out the roads, we are moving to the entrance, where I'll be continuing the theme of this video, so I have the road slightly lowered compared to it. Due to that elevation change, I am once again using paths to get a nice wall. The idea is that there is gonna be an access road wrapped around the inset I just created going to the convention center entrance. For the important guests, of course. And in the lowered area in the middle, there is gonna be a sitting area with some greenery and some sort of water feature. I wanted to use multiple surfaces outlined by curbs, but net lines don't show up on surfaces above ground, like for example on the inner side of the path, so they just became a nice temporary guideline for the surfaces. Moving on to the inset area, in real life, there is a fountain and some bushes. But since you can't really make a nice fountain in CS2, I'm going to make a little sitting area, as I said before, using these awesome colored bushes and most importantly, these planters I downloaded recently. This is the finished result. It looks very sharp and modern, and can be quite a nice place to sit down for a bit. But I might have overdone it with the bright bushes a bit. Let me know in the comments what are your thoughts. Now I'll be moving to the back of the convention center, if it can be called like that. By now I don't even know what the front and back are. I've been calling the entrance side I just finished the front, but before that I had been calling the park side the front. So I guess that the back is any non-architectural side, or any side the average person does not interact with. So this would be the back, I guess. Anyway, let's get to what I'm actually building here. Basically, it's a delivery and storage area, just the general behind the scenes. This would be where the dumpsters are, where concrete barriers and stuff are stored, or where a truck would pull up to when delivering some materials for setting up a venue for an event inside. Because of this, it needs to be separated from the outside world, and guarded by a booth like the one I just built at the entrance. Next I placed some vehicles. Personal ones that might be of some of the employees working here, and also vans or trucks that are here to transport all the stuff needed for the events to and from here. Then I'm gonna prop up the place with almost anything you could imagine being stored or just worked with outside. I don't really know what places like this look like in real life. So the purpose of this is to make it at least somewhat believable and, most importantly, looking full, alive and complete. So, this is how the space looks like finished. Now I just need to do exactly the same on the other side. And with a bit of editing magic, this is it. The same detailing, just on a slightly larger scale. Now I'm moving on to something that I initially didn't expect to do in this episode at all. And that is building some residential towers. At first, I didn't want to build in this space in between the convention center rings and the road at all, because I need two very specific assets for it. But that only applies to 2 out of the 3 lots. So why don't we fill in the one where I can do just fine with existing assets. Only after placing some paths around the towers did it occur to me that notification bubbles mean that I placed the functional versions of these buildings and accidentally provided room for the first residents of the city. So now, I guess, I need to connect the existing roads to outside connections and provide all of the city services in a temporary campus on the side. Well, that was quite an anticlimactic way to start populating the city. Previously, I wanted to do that in the next episode. Then I needed to widen the pedestrian road to allow vehicles to drive to these buildings for the people to move in, because the narrow pedestrian roads are one way. This is pretty annoying limitation, but I kind of get it. Even pedestrian streets need to be accessible for cars, for cases of emergency or deliveries. But what I don't get is why do the taxis need to stop directly at the address, and why can't we place buildings on paths? Because that is totally a thing in real life. Some buildings just don't need deliveries, or they can be taken care of by back access, and when it comes to emergency, it is totally okay for a fire truck to go down a path. This unexpected widening made this gap between the pedestrian and the car road much narrower, which ruined my plan of just planting a bunch of bushes on the slope. But ultimately, I'm actually quite happy for that, because I get to build nice stairs going down, and in the process, I can learn how to better integrate stairs and these planters into the city. For the gentler part of the slopes, where the streets get further from each other, I chose to stick with the previous concept and just fill it with colorful bushes. And for the backside of the towers, I opted for more chaotic arrangement. As the last thing before moving on to the third part of the video and finally finishing the park, I'm gonna detail this access road heading to the side entrance of the convention center. This part is mainly about netlines, surfaces and a bit of foliage, so I'm gonna skip most of it since you've already seen it about a million times. But even amidst the normally repetitive detailing, you sometimes find some unexpected challenges. This time, it was filling in this awkward shape with raised planters, which, I think, despite its difficulty, was totally worth it, as it brought just enough of that sweet elevation change to this area, breaking the flatness at least a tiny bit and making it a little more interesting to look at. Now let's pause the detailing for a bit, because this side of the convention center screams with emptiness. That's because IRL, there is a high-rise hotel in this corner, so I made the wall plain. But when creating the asset, I decided that I'm not gonna put a high-rise there, because it would make the asset way less flexible, which would be bad if I eventually decided to share it. However, now I found the perfect asset to put here, so there will be a high-rise after all. It fits really well here. I just need to cover some of the windows with horizontal pillars, so that they don't interfere with the roof. Anyway, let's get back to detailing, and I guess I'll just show you the result. Basically, I just added some planters, made a drop of blue bread, and added some markings. I'm just not 100% sure about those, I want some markings here, but they are just too bright. I would appreciate some slightly worn down markings. If you know of any, let me know. Now we are moving on to the third and final part of the video, where our goal is to finish the park. And the thing that the park lacks now is a children's playground. I experimented with the layout a bit behind camera, because in the beginning I didn't know what I wanted at all, but now I do. So I'll immediately start with terraces made with pedestrian paths to create some elevation changes, adding more interest to the area. I'm using sweeping curves and circular shapes here while avoiding sharp corners to make the area more friendly and appealing to children. This is the final layout of the terraces, so now I can add a hill behind it to provide a nice backdrop and separate the play area from the rest of the park. To provide access to the terraces, I'm adding a ramp to the middle one and just stairs to the upper one. Next I decided to detail the middle part to get an idea of what to do before committing to the whole thing, starting with the surfaces. This would seem like an easy job, but it turned out to be way more difficult than anticipated. Originally, I wanted to have like a blob shape of some sort of sand or gravel, and the rest tiled. But there is no good looking sand or gravel surface that overlaps paths. So in the end, I resorted to concrete surface covered by a colored surface and by semi-transparent black surface, to emulate the rubber often used on playgrounds. After all, that's what they used in IRL Kuala Lumpur. And I covered the whole thing with it. For the colors, I used the dark versions as the rest is way too bright and often entirely covers the concrete texture. Because even though it probably isn't visible in the video, the rough concrete texture shows a bit through the colored surface and emulates the playground rubber texture. So, this would be the idea for the surface. Now let's move to the probe work to actually make it into a playground. First, I'm adding a pergola to provide a sitting space for the parents. And below I want tiles, because it technically is not part of the play area. Next, I'm gonna place the actual play equipment. I know nothing about playground design, so I'm just gonna place random stuff everywhere and add a planter here and there to make space for some trees providing shade. Then I added benches and trash bins, and as the last detail, a fence, which even despite its importance on a playground like this, I almost forgot. And with that, this little part is done, and I think it looks great and can serve as a template for the rest of the playground. So let's put on time lapse and get to building. And after hours of placing crazy amounts of props, the massive playground is finished. So let's now shift our focus to the area behind it, because even though the playground is big, there is still quite a large area left to fill. At least part of the area I want to make look natural, so there will be a forest with a stream and a small path made out of large stones, and this is what I'm starting with. To make paths like this, I use these stone heads, because the small rocks are too small and the large ones too big. Also, it would be too tedious to rotate every individual rock to have them flat side up, but these heads are the perfect size and always flat. I intentionally left a gap in the middle for the stream, and after making a small groove for it, I'm building a small bridge across it out of a large stone slab. I don't know why, but these bridges made out of single natural slabs of stone always fascinated me. I remember that for me as a kid, they were like a second best thing in the local botanical garden, obviously right after feeding goats. For detailing the stream, I'm using a riverbed surface and seafoam decals to simulate the fast flowing water. I initially wanted to make it all waterless, including the pond, because I thought it was too small, so I tried to simulate water with wet decals. It didn't work, but luckily I was wrong about it being too small, and the new water sim managed to fill in the pond perfectly. Then it's just a matter of a couple of rocks, trees and bushes, and I think it looks absolutely amazing. The rest of the park I'm gonna detail in the same way as I did in the first part of the video. So bushes along the paths, semi-random trees and some simple terraces to make it more interesting to look at. And at the end, just a couple of subtle decals to spruce up the grass a bit, so it's not as flat and boring. The park is finished, but it's not the end of the video just yet, as there are surely lots of things that I either forgot about or didn't know how to do properly when building them. So let's quickly look at the final touches before wrapping it up. The first one is here at the convention center entrance, where I don't have a fence, because there simply wasn't any fitting one at the time of building. But luckily, Mayor Wand made a set of glass fences just in time, so shout out to Mayor Wand, I'm putting these in. Staying with the theme of glass is the roof over the side entrance. When I was building this area, I figured that no roof is better than non-transparent one. But now, with the power of glass I found on PDX mods, I could finally make the roof I wanted. And that of course also applies to the other side. Then it's time for the convention center roof, where I just added a couple of AC units, vents and stuff, because it felt too empty. And last but not least, I obviously forgot about the other fence at the playground. That's what you get for making a deal out of not forgetting the first one. And with that finished, it's all done. We have a detailed park with a playground, a custom convention center, and we even started to populate the city by a complete accident. I just need to apologize for not sharing the convention center asset, at least for now, because something in the asset editor causes an error when trying to package it. So I thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed the video, and if so, you can like, and if you haven't done so already, consider subscribing or writing a comment with feedback or some suggestions for the next ones. But now, take care, enjoy the cinematics, bye bye.